Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I'll be filling in for Tucker unless I read the schedule entirely wrong. A lot of news. A major summit has turned into a clash in some respects between President Trump and the leaders of Europe, the 29 others that make up NATO. It happened in Brussels. It happened today, this morning for us, in the afternoon for them. At issue, levels of defense spending. President Trump wants them to spend more, a lot more. The allies say, we will, eventually.
Many countries are not paying what they should, and frankly, many countries owe us a tremendous amount of money for many years back, where they're delinquent, as far as I'm concerned, because the United States has had to pay for them. So if you go back 10 or 20 years, you'll just add it all up. It's massive amounts of money is owed. The United States has paid and stepped up like nobody. This has gone on for decades, by the way. This has gone on for many presidents, but no other president brought it up like I bring it up.
And many have complained about it. The president also singled out Germany for criticism because they're an economic powerhouse, accusing them of funneling billions of dollars to Russia, even though they sought protection from Russian military from us. Listen.
We have to talk about the billions and billions of dollars that's being paid to the country that we're supposed to be protecting you against. You know, everybody's talking about it all over the world. They'll say, well, wait a minute, we're supposed to be protecting you from Russia, but why are you paying billions of dollars to Russia for energy? Why are countries in NATO, namely Germany, having a large percentage of their energy needs paid, you know, to Russia and taken care of by Russia? Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia.
You know, it's just funny looking at the American team. They're looking around going, well, this is a little different. Well, talking heads on other networks were horrified, especially this place called MSNBC. Former NATO ambassador Nicholas Burns made the odd claim that it's Orwellian for the president to say exactly what he thinks.
It's just infuriating to watch this happen. You cannot imagine any American president all the way back 75 years deciding to become the critic-in-chief of NATO. I mean, it's Orwellian. It's infuriating to see this happen. It's diplomatic malpractice.
And Nicholas Burns worked for a Republican administration, Bush 43. Meanwhile, hours after the president's comments, the U.S. House unanimously approved a resolution expressing support for NATO. So the president's remarks were controversial to some, but were they wrong? Lou Dobbs. He stars on the Lou Dobbs Show, and I believe that's exactly who I'm looking at right now from Fox Business. He just completed his show, therefore he gets time and a half. This is overtime for Lou.
Excellent.
You're all about dollars and cents.
Delighted to be with you.
I know you were watching Fox and Friends this morning, which was prime time for the president's remarks. Yeah. So tell me, were you okay with his tone, tenor, and tactics?
I think that every American ought to be thrilled with what the president did in Brussels. He talked straight to the leaders of Europe and told them that it's time to start making sense. Telling Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, that you can't just BS your way through another summit meeting and look for a joint communique that says everything's fine, because it isn't. 24 countries are not meeting there are 23 countries that are not meeting their 2% of GDP requirement for national defense. They're depending on the United States. It's that straightforward. And Germany is the worst offender among them and is the most egregious in its trade imbalances. It has run trade surpluses, get ready for this one, for 67 years, Brian. Right. I mean, good Lord. Get real. So,
Lou, a couple of things. Number one, the president's a little ticked off at Germany in particular because they put the hub of this gas line right through Germany, past Eastern European nations that are under threat from Russia, and they didn't seem to care. One of the explanations by the German foreign secretary was, listen, we started building it in 2002. Russia was different then. So they've become somewhat belligerent, so now we're stuck with this deal. Could they have put the ratchets down and unscrewed the pipeline and maybe changed tactics? And we have this thing called oil and gas too, don't we, Lou? And wouldn't we be a reliable, wouldn't they be a reliable customer for us?
It certainly would, and a host of other countries, including some within OPEC, which would be also very helpful to foreign policy goals in that region. But the reality here is that the Germans haven't lost their free will. They are following their leader, And Angela Merkel has decided that there's not much difference between the socialists of Germany and the communists of Russia. And she and Putin, despite her rhetoric, have a rather amicable relationship. And Gerhard Schroeder is the head of the new pipeline that is bypassing Ukraine, among other countries, and going straight and directly to the heart of Germany. Isn't that a cozy relationship?
So, Lou, let me tell you something. So if you're Vladimir Putin, the best thing you would like to see is the breakup of NATO or friction in NATO. We're having our arguments in public like we always do, Democrats and Republicans at home and now overseas. Do you think he is happy about this? And therefore, do you think the president openly criticizing NATO works to Putin's advantage?
I think, frankly, Brian, he's far happier about Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, who are defending Germany. And they're absolutely unbalanced and mercantilist trade policies and the deal with Russia. That's where the real, to me, political fulcrum and advantage rests with Putin and the West. This is immaterial to him, the little nonsense from Stoltenberg and the NATO nations. What bothers him is Trump is talking seriously about the issues, knows the facts, and won't let simple niceties prevent him from talking truth to the world leaders.
Right. They have committed to spend $264 billion over the next 4 or 5 years on their collective defense. They have committed to changing tactics, fighting terror and cyber security. So those are positives, and President Trump is given credit for doing that and changing things. And some of President Trump's complaints are the same as President Obama's complaints and same as President Bush's complaints. But no one complains about seeing Lou Dobbs on at 8 o'clock on Fox News Channel. And Lou, just please invoice me or leave it on my desk so we can just have this settled before the summer goes on.
As you wish, the same place, same address, always and the same amount, I suppose, but at time and a half.
Absolutely. Two
Brian,
networks,
great to be with you.
back to back. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was Lou Dobbs. Meanwhile, President Trump is trying to get NATO allies to spend more on their own defense. In fact, he even mentioned up to 4%, which is more than we spend. I sense that was just a bit of pie in the sky. That could only be meant to counter Russia anyway. Somehow, to Democrats in the press, this proves that Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's agent.
It's so upsetting to see that Putin, whose #1 goal is to divide the West, and particularly in NATO, has an American president doing his work for him.
Everyone wonders why the president is so nice to this scoundrel, this bully. One wonders about that, and is it related to the Russia investigation and everything else?
He could not be doing Putin's bidding more effectively if he were an active agent of Vladimir Putin and the KGB.
All right. David Tafuri is a lawyer and advisor to President Barack Obama's campaigns on foreign policy. He joins us right now. So it's been a very exciting day. Sometimes these NATO summits are relatively sleepy. In fact, we got to be reminded when we're on air on Fox and Friends in the morning, oh, we got to take a shot of the president walking out shaking hands. Not this time, David. Do you have a problem with the president voicing the same complaints as President Obama out in public?
Look, NATO is not perfect, but it's the most important alliance that we are a part of. In the 70 years that it's been in place, not one NATO member has been invaded. That's really important. Also, when we were attacked on 9/11, it was NATO that stepped up and helped us and invoked Article 5. NATO is so important to us, and President Trump is not doing the work to basically state that. He can state productive criticisms of NATO, but he should also acknowledge how important it is for a security framework. The senators that you played who have criticisms of President Trump's comments are right. Those your older audience members will remember that it was NATO and the U.S. together that helped defeat the Warsaw Pact. That was the Soviet bloc-led alliance, and that is also super important. Now, exactly what Putin and Russia want is for NATO to be weak, to be broken apart. And Trump is, in essence, helping Putin do that by openly criticizing NATO, by being very difficult and hard on NATO, instead of coming up with productive criticisms.
You know, David, you have a good point. If it was over now, if this was the end of his 4 or 8 year term, you'd say, wow, President Trump was negative on NATO. But do you think there might be a method to this approach? They are getting them to to spend more. They are focused on cyber terror. Do you know in the last year and a half they've come up with a 30-day quick action plan on land, sea, and air in order to strike back against a Russian threat that didn't really exist 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? And the head of NATO even cited Donald Trump as giving credit for pushing this type of change. Could you just also possibly sit back and say maybe doing something a little different might get us better results?
Look, you're right that the head of NATO gave Trump some credit, and Trump deserves some credit. But let's take this in context. Remember that the obligation to spend 2% of your GDP on your defense came in 2014. And it's an obligation that the NATO members have to meet over a 10-year period. So most of the countries that have not yet met that are not actually in violation of that agreement. That's important to note. But Trump is right to push those countries. But Trump should be more creative in his discussions. Instead of just harping on the failure to pay the full 2%, he should talk about how each country can participate more effectively, the types of things that they should be spending on. Pure spending is not good enough for us. We need strategic spending, the type of spending that's going to help push back our enemies, the terrorists, and push back and be a bulwark to Putin and Russia. He doesn't talk about any of those things, and a good leader would be doing that right now.
David, you're always level-headed. You know, you're coming from President Obama's perspective. I get it, but you're level-headed and open. You know things had to be a little different. But real quick, are you okay with him calling out Germany by taking this pipeline? Because Poland's upset by it. Other Eastern European nations are upset by it and are kind of saying, Mr. President of the United States, good job. Do you understand there might be a benefit to pushing Germany to actually speaking, asking for defense and also not going to bed with Russia?
On the energy deal between Germany and Russia, Trump is right to criticize Germany. But, others have criticized Germany for that, too. That's not new, and I'm not sure why he brought it up in such a provocative way today. It's also important to note that Germany doing that deal with Russia does create some interdependence on the part of Russia as well. Russia now will need those payments from Germany. So Germany will have some additional leverage over Russia. I would prefer that Germany was getting the gas from other sources. If it could come from the U.S., that would be better. Yeah, of course, that would be better.
All right. Hey, David, always great to have you on. I love your perspective.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Meanwhile, Colonel Douglas Macgregor served as the Director of Joint Operations Center in the Supreme Headquarters of Allied Europe. He knows it inside and out. He really served there during the 1990 Kosovo campaign. He wrote that book. It's called Margin of Victory. Colonel Macgregor joins us right now. Colonel, we got 28 NATO bases. From a military perspective, and if you look at 70 years, there hasn't been a Soviet/Russian invasion, and NATO is beginning to change its objective. Who would have thought there would have been in Afghanistan, having a cyber unit to it? Can you see the positive impact the president's making?
Well, I think the president's impact has been positive from the outset. Look, he's delivering a message that is at least 2 decades overdue. The Europeans have been essentially enjoying defense cost-free, for the most part, thanks to the United States. We bring the balance of the military power. We provide the command and control. Without us, there is frankly no NATO. And he was absolutely right to talk about Germany. It's not simply a question of funding in Germany. Germany effectively has no armed forces anymore. And the armed forces in Germany are hopelessly demoralized.
And they tried to have they have a volunteer service. They said, "Hey guys, we have a budget. Sign up." No Germans signed up.
Well, that's only part of the problem. The larger problem is that the Germans, thanks to us, don't feel obligated to defend themselves. And the president has simply said, look, why should the American taxpayer defend you if you aren't willing to defend yourself? There's this thing called Article 3 in the NATO treaty that says each country will build adequate defenses for itself. They're not doing it. So the Poles are right. The Poles have asked repeatedly for the last several years, where is the German army? Because without a German army, any defense of Eastern Europe is frankly impossible.
Why is it that these new Eastern European free nations, when the wall fell, seem more dedicated to NATO than the older Western nations? Why is that?
Well, that's an easy question, and there's an easy answer. Anyone in the world who's lived under Russian occupation, that includes the Germans who live in the former territory of East Germany or the German Democratic Republic, doesn't want to repeat the experience. These people want to be desperately allied with us for their own interests, so that they can protect themselves against what they view as an inevitable Russian attempt to regain control of their countries. And by the way, there's a lot of evidence to support their contention. The problem is that world warfare has changed. We can't permanently station troops in the Baltics or Poland. If we did, they'd be killed in the first strikes launched in the early hours of any future intervention. We can't be the first responder. That's the bottom line to NATO's problems in Eastern Europe. The president knows that. He wants to support them, he wants to reinforce them, but he wants them to be their own first responder.
Colonel, I'm getting the rap signal through my ear. Just trust me on that. Real quick. People are getting upset saying the president's nicer to Vladimir Putin than he is our own allies. Don't you think it's a matter of you expect more from your friends, families, and neighbors than you do of your rivals/enemies?
Well, maybe, but I think the president is looking for the opportunity to remove the requirement to treat Russia as a permanent enemy in Eastern Europe. So I think people should welcome that, much as Theresa May suggested.
Right, although they've done nothing to deserve that type of openness. They've been belligerent and they've been provocative, and they meddled in our election. Colonel, thanks for your service. Great to see you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, let me tell you what's coming up straight ahead over the next 44